As Detective Smith continued his investigation into the disappearance of Michael Williams, he felt like he was running out of leads. He had followed every possible clue and interviewed every witness he could find, but he still couldn't seem to find any solid evidence that would help him solve the case. Just when he was starting to lose hope, he received a call from the county crime lab. They had found some DNA evidence on a piece of cloth that had been found near the hardware store, and it matched the DNA of a known criminal who had been in the area at the time of Michael's disappearance. At first, the suspect denied any involvement in the case. But as Detective Smith pressed him harder, he finally broke down and admitted that he had been hired by the rival hardware store owner, Frank, to kidnap Michael and hold him for ransom. Frank had been facing financial problems and had hoped to use the ransom money to pay off his debts. He had arranged for the suspect and his accomplices to kidnap Michael and hold him until the ransom was paid. Detective Smith was relieved to finally have the truth, but he knew that his work was far from over. He still had to locate Michael and rescue him from his captors. But with this new information, he felt more confident than ever that he would be able to bring the perpetrators to justice and bring Michael home safe and sound. With the suspect's confession in hand, Detective Smith knew that he was one step closer to rescuing Michael Williams and bringing the perpetrators to justice. But he still had to locate Michael and make sure that he was safe. He called for backup and set out to track down the location where Michael was being held. It was a risky move, but Detective Smith was determined to bring Michael home. After several hours of searching, Detective Smith and his team finally located the place where Michael was being held. It was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, and as they approached, they could hear the sound of someone moving inside. Detective Smith signaled for his team to be ready, and then he burst through the door, guns drawn. Inside, they found Michael, bruised and battered but alive. After a tense standoff, Detective Smith was able to disarm the suspects and rescue Michael. He immediately called for an ambulance to take Michael to the hospital, and then he arrested the suspects and brought them back to the police station. As they waited for the ambulance to arrive, Michael thanked Detective Smith for rescuing him safely. Smith then informed Elizabeth and could hear the relief in her voice. He knew that he had done everything in his power to bring her husband home safely. After Michael was taken to the hospital, Detective Smith questioned the suspects in detail about their involvement in the case. He learned that Frank, the rival hardware store owner, had been facing financial problems and had hoped to use the ransom money to pay off his debts. He had arranged for the suspect and his accomplices to kidnap Michael and hold him until the ransom was paid. With this new information, Detective Smith was even more determined to bring Frank and the other suspects to justice. He knew that they had caused immense pain and suffering to Elizabeth and her family, and he was determined to make sure that they paid for their crimes.